Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the session, so if you could all put away your cell phones, which I suppose are now really supercomputers, so I notice people are using their cell phones to take photographs, to take video. So what's the point of saying put away your cell phones? Just put them on mute so that they don't disturb us. How's that? We have a great panel here. They need no introduction, but as Henry Kissinger once said, those who need no introduction crave introductions the most. But I am not going to follow that principle. I'm just going to identify them. Condoleezza Rice is many, many things, but she is also the 66th Secretary of State of the United States. Maroš Šefčovič is the Vice President for Energy Union at the European Commission. Andriy Kobolyev is the CEO of Naftogaz right here in Kiev. And Ian Taylor is the President and CEO of Vitol. I'm going to take the liberty, because we have Condi with us, and because I've known her for a long time when we were both junior academics. And under the guise of talking about the future of energy, I'm going to ask her a couple of questions about energy. So Condi, when you look at what is happening in North Korea, China provides 90% of the energy for North Korea. If China were to turn off that tap tomorrow, North Korea would feel the pain in a way completely different from anything else. As you know, I think it was when you were Secretary of State, they once did turn off the energy because of an issue that they cared about. Is there, if you start with the premise that North Korea will only respond to pressure from China because that is the only country with which it is integrated economically, is there any pressure that China could apply? Will it, and what do you think the path is to getting China to think about it in those terms?
Well, thank you, Fareed, and it's been a wonderful conference thus far, and I want to thank Victor Pinchuk and all who've made this possible. So we're talking about a particular kind of energy, a negative energy, which is the potential for a fully armed nuclear North Korea. And I want to associate myself with something that those on an earlier panel said. I do not think this is acceptable to any president of the United States. I don't care what the name would be. And so the question is, how do you pressure the North Koreans? And you're right, it's through China. 90% also of trade, about 93% of trade. So China has many levers that it could pull with North Korea. I don't know if China will do it because I don't think China's calculation has changed. And that calculation is this. They are more concerned about the collapse of the regime, what that might mean geopolitically in terms of possibly even the unification of Korea on our terms. They are concerned about refugee flows and instability on a long border with the North Koreans. So thus far, they've feared that more than they feared a nuclear North Korea. When we tried to negotiate in the six-party talks with them, we said to them, the way to do this is get a non-nuclear North Korea, and then we can deal with ending the armistice, a peace treaty, and so forth and so on. So a nuclear North Korea is the way to a stable Korean peninsula that is favorable to your interests. The time is running out for that argument to hold.
And also, Condi, wouldn't you say that what has happened now is there is an open breach between North Korea and China? If you watch what has happened, the leader of North Korea has assassinated his uncle, who was
under Chinese protection.
He was the negotiator with China.
Right.
He assassinated his half-brother, the only man who could have replaced him in a Chinese coup, which would have kept the dynasty intact. The Chinese president has now met with the South Korean president 10 times, and he has never met with the North Korean president. The first time the leader of China has refused to meet with the leader of North Korea. So I wonder, is that something that could be exploited?
I think it has to be exploited. I do think we're going to have to find a way quietly, which is hard in diplomacy, to reassure the Chinese on the issues that they're concerned about, that we will not take advantage somehow of a failed North Korean state, that we're not prepared to try to unify prematurely the Korean peninsula on our terms, all of those things. But I agree with you. I think the breach is very wide. I had a former Chinese official tell me that there's one other thing that we've underestimated. Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father, always understood that China had saved his father in the Korean War. And he had a kind of psychological and philosophical attachment to China that Kim Jong-un does not have. And so they argue that they have less influence with Kim Jong-un than they had with Kim Jong-il. So, but we have to test it. And I think the first thing is to quietly have a conversation with China about what the terms might look like if they take this all the way, they force the regime's hand, and in the eventuality that the regime collapses.
So let me ask you about another case of energy power, which is, of course, Russia.
These are good segues for each.
Russia, Ukraine, and the West. As I said, I think everyone here would be interested in your views on these issues, particularly this one. It seems to me that the Russian calculation is, we're going to stick it out. The situation is ambiguous enough, and the Europeans are hungry enough to do business with us that over time these sanctions will wear out. I interviewed Putin in St. Petersburg in July, a year and a half ago. And, a year and a half ago. And in the green room, it was myself, Nazarbayev, Renzi, the Prime Minister of Italy, and Putin. What I was struck by was the dynamic. He paid no attention to Nazarbayev because Nazarbayev is, he already has him. He spent the entire 20 minutes in the green room trying to convince Renzi that only Italy was suffering for American foreign policy. He kept pointing to me because I suppose he was, present me as the American saying, why are you paying for his foreign policy? And Renzi was very flustered, but I will say he was trying very hard to maintain the possibility of Italian business. He kept saying, we love doing business in Russia. We love the Russian. We just have to get through this patch. And I think that's Putin's calculation, that everyone is looking for the day that the sanctions get done, and they want to be first in line.
His calculation is that the West will lose interest and get tired. And he has ample evidence that it's happened before. Now, I think in this case, it's harder because so far the European Union has held strong, particularly because I think Merkel has held strong. Secondly, because the United States, particularly in the Congress, has continued to up the ante in terms of the sanctions, making it actually very difficult, as Bob Gates was saying earlier, for the administration to do anything on sanctions because they've written them in a way that the administration doesn't even have a waiver on sanctions. So I think if Putin thinks this is going to fall apart soon, he's probably not right about that. And so I would say the following to Ukraine under the circumstances. Use whatever time there is where there's pressure on the Russians through sanctions to get governance intact, to increase Ukrainian energy independence from Russia, to do what you can in those parts of eastern Ukraine where you can to have a favorable image among the population. In other words, however long you have where the sanctions are in place and Russia is held at bay, use the time well. Don't sit and wait for the international community to isolate Russia forever. It won't happen forever. Russia's too important a country. Get busy governing Ukraine.
So, Maroš, how do you react to this? Are the Europeans going to fall apart? Are they inevitably going to move from this unified front?
I wouldn't contradict my former teacher. So, no, but I have to say, to put the record straight, that of course we are holding united, we are holding strong. And to be quite honest, we paid much more in lowering of a trade between Russia and Europe than United States, for example. So
as as Mr. Putin keeps pointing out.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the cost, so I think, I mean, we have to be fair to Europeans that for us, because this is a very big country, and very close to us, and we had much more dense trade relationship. I would say that we really did our utmost, not only in imposing sanctions on Russia, but also in helping Ukraine. I have a lot of Ukrainian friends here, and I'm sure that they can testify that if it comes to macro financial assistance, if it comes to the supply of gas through the reverse system, which was not easy to introduce, and the fact that now the Ukraine almost exclusively buys the gas from the Western European market just proves that we are very serious about helping the Ukraine. And I would also agree with Conti, and I think we'll be really sending that signal, that message here the whole day. Let's use the time. Let's reform. Let's transform the market. Let's have a good independent regulator. Let's unbundle the big Naftogaz company so that Western European investors could come and invest in transit route. Let's explore the possibilities which we just discussed with Ian about the gas exploration, about the shale gas, and really let's show Ukrainian people that all these reforms, all the changes are bringing positive results for them. And as I said, I believe the best response to the current situation and to all that propaganda we could see on some of the TV screens would be democratic and prosperous Ukraine. And I think this should be our goal, and I believe that together we can definitely achieve it.
Andriy Kobolyev, from your perspective, do you think Russia's use of energy power vis-a-vis Ukraine has worked or has failed?
We believe it was a very efficient tool to control Ukrainian politicians. And the tool was not only about geopolitics. It was, let's call things the way they are. Many people in the past were bribed by gas. Gas was a very convenient and very powerful weapon which was used to keep Ukraine in the loop. And when any politician starts taking money from Russians, he becomes totally in their pocket. And that was the rule of the thumb. And Ukraine needs to make the change which have been achieved so far irreversible. We need to make sure there will be always a market of gas. And if there is a proper market, transparent one, there will be no room for corruption, which will keep us much safer and which will allow us to move in the European direction, not into Russian direction.
So that's very interesting. So, you distinguish between the overt use of energy power, kind of with, shutting off the tap, which in a sense a country can respond to. But what Russia has done is, again, one of this very clever kind of use of hybrid power, where they have used money to buy pro-Russian politicians within Ukraine and pro-Russian forces. Has that lessened over the last 5 years, or is it still pretty active?
I believe that, at least in the gas sector, that was eliminated. And the vicious circle which we had was very simple. Many people were heavily advocating in Ukraine that gas should be given to households at very low price. Well, like a small fraction of the market price, which in return led to two consequences. First consequence, domestic production was declining. Second consequence, domestic consumption was huge. It's still big, it's much less now, but it was growing. What happened as an outcome of this? We had to increase imports. Guess where we were taking that gas from? From Russia. So Russians basically killing two birds in one shot. They would bribe people and they would increase the exports of gas to Ukraine, keeping Ukraine a weak state, poor state, and totally controlled. And then Mr. Putin could go to TV screen and say, and by the way, we are giving our brother Ukraine a very cheap gas. You should value that, my friends. Now this argument is gone. He can't say that. And we also proved that the price we had to pay in the past for Russian imports was higher than the market price. We proved it in Stockholm. And it's important that Ukraine keeps going this way, proving more things, not only to outside, but also to ourselves, that we can do it and we can live as a proper country responsible for low gas consumption, for transparent processes, zero tolerance to corruption. That's very important. And the last point from my point of view, now is the major challenge for our country. We need to adopt zero tolerance to corruption policy in all branches of power. Corruption happens in every country in the world, from Uganda to Norway. The difference is whether it's tolerated or not. We should stop tolerating corruption.
Naftogaz used to lose $8 billion. It now makes $1 billion. Is that difference corruption or mismanagement?
One of the interesting outcomes from my tenure in Naftogaz, I always thought that if there is corruption in the company, let's say the company all pays for gas, 10%, the 10% is the amount that the company in the country is losing. Well, the reality is much worse. In order to steal 10%, management wastes another 50. So the multiplying effect of corruption is huge. And if any manager starts being corrupt, he has no time for proper management. He's not thinking how to develop the company, how to pay taxes. He's focused on one thing, not to get caught, day and night. And that's, again, very different. So I believe that corruption was the major element of this, but lots of money was wasted. Lots of money was overpaid to Gazprom. Lots of money was paid to Gazprom for not going to court at the time when the chance came. And many other things. Those are the lost money. And some money was stolen.
Ian, what does this, put this in the context of what is happening in the world with energy prices, with energy supply and demand? What are we likely to see? What forces are going to be strengthened? What forces are going to be weakened? You know, when you think about a player like Russia, Russia is always doing well when oil prices and energy prices are high. It is always on the defensive when oil prices get too low.
No, I think it's a very good point. I think, if anything, it is remarkable what the US industry has done, as we probably all know, and technology. They have survived and they are profitable at $50 without a problem. And what is happening is that the US is becoming a very major exporter of crude oil. And guess where they're going to export it to? Europe. It's coming, not just to Europe, it's going to come all over the place, you know, Europe, the Far East. And by the way, it won't just be oil, there'll be gas as well. So I would strongly argue that price is going to do a huge amount of what some of the things that Andriy would like to see. And by the way, Andriy, we'd love to see them as well. But I would stress to him that time is really running out, because if you don't move fast, you will basically, you know, there's going to be a time when I think Russia, by the way, will run out of time probably to monetize their oil assets. They simply will not be able to produce competitively at the way that basically the US can and basically some other parts of the world can. And so, you know, from Ukraine point of view, I think it's great news for the population. Prices should go down. But, you know, getting big international companies back into Ukraine to take advantage of the situation here will be very difficult unless, you know, independent regulator. I mean, there is fantastic potential here, as we all know, but there's not a level playing field, there's not transparent tenders, you know, all the things that, unfortunately, we've been saying for years, and they still don't exist. So, and capital today, and that's maybe my final point, capital today for the oil industry is extremely competitive, and one of the things you've seen happening, you know, all the big oil companies, all the majors, Condoleezza oil companies, got a great position in the Permian, they're all going back to making sure that they produce a lot more oil in America.
Just on that exact point, I was actually a director of Chevron Corporation for 10 years, from 1991 until 2001. And your point, Ian, is extremely important because for a long time it was more difficult to produce in the United States. It was more expensive to produce in the United States. And I said to Ken Durr, who was the CEO at the time, is it true you only seem to find oil in unstable places? And so it was go where the geology was good. The geology is really good now, and the competitiveness is really good in the United States, and it will put pressure on others to get their act together. So I agree that this is a near term. I say this also to producers in the Middle East. You'd really better find a way to make your industries efficient, your politics transparent, regulation transparent, contracts mean something, or you're going to be left sitting by the side of the road. Because if you can produce effectively, efficiently, and cost effectively in the United States, people will do it. And it's not just the United States, Canada and Mexico to a certain extent has come on board as well.
So, Condi, that raises to me a very interesting geopolitical issue, because I think you're absolutely right, but I think that the chance of people heeding your advice and being able to replicate the American miracle is very low. If you look at the conditions that made shale happen in America, it's an extraordinary confluence of things. You had a lot of shale, very good geology. These fields had been mapped and drilled for 100 years, so we knew exactly where things were. China has a lot of shale, they don't know where it is. You have property rights which allow you to have individuals make contract with oil companies. That provided enormous advantage. You have lots of water. Again, China has very little water. So you have all these things that made it possible. And I think and then you had this technological revolution where you can go down 1 mile and laterally 1 mile. You know this all better than I do. But my question is, what if for the next 15 years we are in a window where the United States is an energy superpower on a scale that we haven't seen for 30, 40, 50 years? The United States has become the single largest producer of liquid hydrocarbons in the world already. It is larger than Saudi Arabia. It is larger than Russia. It is going to become probably one of the top 3 exporters next year. And then 3 years from that, it will probably be the single largest exporter. What does that mean? You know, put yourself in the National Security Council role that you held. What does it mean for American power? Will the United States be able to use that vis-a-vis something like Russia and say to the Europeans, don't worry about Putin's gas, we can get you gas?
The most important thing is you will be able to deny to certain states the oil card as a weapon. So I was actually Secretary of State when oil went to $147 a barrel. Nothing warped diplomacy like oil at $147 a barrel. It allowed the Iranians to resist coming to terms on their nuclear program. This is 2007, 2008, because they were flush. Even with all of the sanctions, they were flush because of the price of oil. It allowed Vladimir Putin to play the oil card against Ukraine and against Europe. It allowed Hugo Chavez to buy elections in parts of Central America and Latin America. Putin has said this is a geopolitical card, and they play it that way. Now, if the United States and the North American platform is actually as powerful as it is slated to be, if we don't mess it up, we could still mess it up ourselves, but if the United States doesn't mess it up and we work with Canada and Mexico, it's going to deny to a lot of these others that oil card because price will not permit them to operate that way. So I think the geopolitics of this are real, they're transformative, and for the good.
Maroš, what does it look like in Europe? There are shale deposits in France and Poland, but it seems, again, that between the politics, the technology, there is very little likelihood of movement in that direction.
Maybe the first point on LNG, I think it was quite clear for us that the LNG and shale revolution in the United States clearly is a very important factor, and it's really dramatically changing the energy geopolitics. And we are very big energy market. We are big importers of energy. We are paying 1 billion of euros per day for energy imports. And for us, it was quite clear that if we want to increase our energy security, we have to diversify. We have to have different routes of supply. We have to have different suppliers. But we also have to do our homework, meaning to improve the software and the hardware, I would say. And by hardware, I mean we need much better interconnectors. We have this bidirectional flow, which is so important in the case of Ukraine. We need to use much better our storage facilities, and we have to finalize the buildup of the infrastructure to receive the LNG. And we have seen how important it was for Baltic countries, how crucial it is for Poland. I hope that we will very soon have a floating terminal in Krk in Croatia. We have lots of opportunities in Mediterranean. Spain has a huge potential. So what we miss...
But are these things going to happen? You keep saying we must.
No, I mean, it's happening. It's happening already. It's happening already. And what I think we need in Europe is only better interconnection between Spain and France. And we would increase dramatically the possibility how to use the LNG in our system. But to be quite honest, at the same time, also Russian suppliers know what's happening in Europe, what we are trying to do. And therefore, when I was in Houston, I was kind of challenging this Texas approach to the business. And I told them, you have to be more competitive in Europe. You have to be able to compete with the pipeline gas. You have to be ready to sell the LNG on the gas hub pricing in Europe, because this is where we are pushing. So we are also for more competition, and we want to create really liquid market in Europe that we would never face situations like we did in 2009.
What would be the effect of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Andriy, being completed?
May I just make one reflection on your comment? You mentioned factors which led to shale revolution in the US. I must tell you that if you look at Ukraine, Ukraine used to produce 3 times more gas than we produce now. We are the cradle where the gas industry of this part of the world, at least for USSR, definitely was born. Gas was produced in Western Ukraine long time ago. We have people, we have water, we don't have much shale, we are not sure about this, we have lots of tight gas, which is very deep, which is secure ecologically, and the only difference between us is US. Yes, there's difference in technology, but you can buy it. It's available on the market. Our subsidiary UGV is showing this, but we need to change regulation. Subsoil law in US did a miracle, from my point of view. You need to simplify rules. You need to make security services do their security job, not to help gas producing companies developing the gas. Well, with all due respect, not your business, guys. And then it can flourish. And
is this likely to happen?
Sorry?
Is this likely, are these regulations likely to change?
We are fighting for this, and we hope that people will be able to convince themselves that they need to release this and allow market, allow free competition and stable rules of the game. That can bring Ukraine, let's say, to significantly increase production. Then we can become energy independent. And then is a question you're asking about Nord Stream 2 will have significantly less impact on us. Then we'll be less vulnerable to this. And if we'll be less vulnerable to this, then Mr. Putin might sit in his room at some point of time and say, why should I spend another $20 billion on something which is a new toy, Ukrainians will not suffer? That can change the whole picture. But if Nord Stream 2 built now, will be in big danger, not only from economic perspective, but also for security perspective. I'm convinced that it's not the major one, but one of considerations Putin needs to decide on if he considers full invasion of Ukraine, what will happen with his gas exports to European Union, whether they will survive a full-fledged war. And if the answer is no, and now it's no, that probably is one of those things that keeps him from invading us. So for us, keeping gas transit through Ukraine is a strategic task. And that's why what Mr. Šefčovič mentioned about unbundling, about attracting European partner is again a must for this government and for this parliament.
Condi, when you look at the Trump administration's energy policy, at one level it seems as though they are dedicated to more export, more exploration, to the extent that there were rules that were hampering it. They want to green light these more. But you raised an issue that has always struck me as the fundamental vulnerability. The best way to leverage American energy power is to think of it as North American energy power, because really it is an interconnected economy, particularly in energy, if you think of Mexico and Canada. And of course, on that issue, Trump himself during the campaign has been very anti-NAFTA, anti the idea of a kind of trade association. Do you think that that's a major obstacle? How will they navigate this challenge?
I suspect that the administration is learning that NAFTA is not a policy, it's a fact. On September 12th, after we were attacked on September 11th, we closed the border with Canada. And within 3 days, no one could make an automobile because the supply line was went through Canada, so integrated manufacturing supply lines. And increasingly, you have integrated energy supply, and that would be the real winner. And once Mexico changed its constitution to allow foreign investment in oil and gas, Mexico became a part of that North American energy platform. So yes, it's possible if you actually carried out the policies that were so prevalent in discussion during the campaign. You know, NAFTA was the worst trade agreement ever signed. It was robbing American jobs and so forth and so on. But if you look at the kind of guidelines that Wilbur Ross and others have developed for the modernization now of NAFTA and the renegotiation of NAFTA, they look pretty modest. And if you pay attention, it's a little bit what was said this morning, if you pay attention to what is being done rather than what is being said, I think you're going to see NAFTA not just survive, but maybe even be strengthened. And I would start with modernization around energy, because when NAFTA was signed, we didn't have the prospect of a North American energy play in the way that we have now. We didn't have Mexico with rules that actually made it a part of that. And so you could imagine, if you were the Trump administration and you were being creative about it, you would say, well, let's push NAFTA and some of the advantages of it into this energy platform in which we have great interest. And it might be a nice little twist to get out of some of the campaign rhetoric that wasn't very helpful about NAFTA.
Maroš, when you look at this issue of Nord Stream 2, because it is so important to Ukraine, I just wondered, what do you think is the likelihood that it will be built?
I think that the commercial interest behind this project is very strong. And when you talk to these promoters, they tell you, it's a commercially driven project, to which I usually contradict by saying that I never seen a commercial project be so hotly debated on the highest political levels. So we all recognize that there is strong strategic importance of this project, but also on the transit route through Ukraine. And I can say that around the Nord Stream, if you talk to the member states, as you can imagine, there are differences of the opinion. But there is unanimity on the importance of the continuation, of the preservation of the transit route through Ukraine. So I think we have now such a dual strategy. One, to make sure that the gas transit through Ukraine is preserved. And for that, I believe the unbundling independent regulator and reputable European companies coming in Ukraine and how to operate this infrastructure, it's key, it's very important. Secondly, of course, we are very clear that we do not like this project, that we see that it's not in line with what we are trying to achieve by the diversification, but we can operate only in the legal framework which we have at our disposal. And for such a situation like this, you need to use the international negotiation. Therefore, we are asking our member states to give us a mandate to negotiate with Russia what would be the terms, the conditions, how the European law would be 100% respected, and how we make sure that the transit route through Ukraine is guaranteed and secured.
All right, I'd like to open it up to questions, to comments. The first person I'd like to ask is a member of the Ukrainian Parliament, Olga Belkova. If we can get a microphone to her, please.
Thank you. I'd like to continue this issue of Nord Stream 2. And I'd like to start by comparing one of the panels before. We were discussing how US and EU and many politicians around the world were underestimating the risks of what was happening in 2013, 2014 in Ukraine. And now that we know about annexation of Crimea, about what happened in Donetsk, everybody understands Russia is very serious. So I think Nord Stream 2 has tremendous risks, not only for my country, and my job is to defend my country, but also for Europe and world at large. Still, when I go to Brussels, I go to Berlin, I hear in Berlin nobody wants to talk about Nord Stream 2. They are ashamed of talking about it. Not everybody, but a lot of people don't want to talk about it. And they say, well, this is commercial, fair point. And then I reply, you don't hire for every commercial, project former chancellors of Germany. So now I think maybe we are too good as Ukrainians. Maybe we just play by the rules. Maybe we should hire former secretaries of states. And and there are quite a few which are well positioned. But of course, and by the way, their board is just being formed right now, and you are perfectly qualified. But to make it a serious question, I know my homework in my parliament. What can I do to convince more people in US, in Brussels, in Berlin, in each and every capital in EU to make them see war happening in Ukraine if Nord Stream 2 being built? Thank you.
Can I first just ask how you disagreed, or you had a comment about this? Can I hear what you had to say?
Thank you, Georg Wellmann, member of the German Parliament, chairman of the German-Ukrainian Parliamentary Group. and member of the Chancellor's Party. We are strongly against Nord Stream 2 in the party group. The main argument is the following. Mr. Miller, the CEO of Gazprom, said, if I have Nord Stream 2, I will close down the Ukrainian pipeline system. That means even when Nord Stream 2 is being built, we have 90 BCM less capacity than we have today. Because the Ukrainian capacity is, I guess, 140 billion, something like that, you know better. So if that's being closed down, even if we have the additional 55 BCM through the Baltic Sea, we have 90 BCM less transport capacity, and that's a big problem, and we have to discuss this. But one big condition our industry is telling us, and the EU is telling us, you desperately have to modernize your pipeline system here. I was the one 5 or 6 years ago started the reverse flow issue. And the German company RWE was the first one to deliver gas from Germany to Ukraine. So that was our initiative. But you have to modernize your system because it's, I guess, 40 or 50 years old. It's still the German AEG. It was a consortium, a German company built that long ago. It must be modernized so you have a reliable transport system which really functions, and the industry and the consumers, the largest consumers, can rely on.
Add one point to this, just interesting one. This morning I had a meeting in Ukrtransgaz, our subsidiary, which transit gas to European countries. And the report I got that the first 7 trucks which deliver first half of General Electric compressor supplied by Ferrostal for Bar compressor station have arrived today in Ukraine on the site. And I must say that initially it was Siemens compressor designed there. But at some point of time, Siemens called us and said, and you know what they said. They said, if we supply one single machine to you, our supply to Russians will be 0. So we are sorry, guys. And Ferrostal changed for General Electric. These compressors are arriving. So Ukraine in this part is doing our job. But in order for us, as management of Naftogaz, to make sure that we step up investment, we need to see future after 2019. As a person responsible for feasible use of money in any company, I'm looking at investment project. And until I see clarity after 2019, I will be restricting my investment to maintain proper level now. I will replace what will be definitely working for domestic transportation, but I will be very careful with transit. We are losing the South Line. The Turkish Stream is a done deal. It's going to be there, whatever we do here, and which means our South Line will die. Thank you.
Just really would like to appreciate the strong comments from our colleague from the Bundestag, and a lot of constructive debates we have with the CDU on this issue. And I would like to add one additional element. It's not only the capacity which we'll be losing, it's also it's the limitation of the routes, because currently we have Nord Stream, we have Yamal, we have Ukrainian transit route, which actually is the biggest, it's the strongest trunk of pipelines. And of course, if this is cut out, so we are actually with the 2 routes with a smaller capacity, so it really has a direct energy security implications, and I think this is very well understood in Europe. But what can be done? And again, we are coming back. We need to make the transit to Ukraine attractive to foreign investors. We need to really have, I would say, good environment financially, legally. We have to offer attractive propositions to the investors, and the investors would come. And I even dare to predict that once we are there, that we will be also able to find the investments into the needed renovation of the system. I was talking to the EBRD, to the EIB, to different IFIs. Everybody feels that this is of strategic importance, and everybody would be ready to look into such a project. So we just need to put this in alignment and really work for it, and start to develop it as soon as conditions permit, which I believe would be after the Stockholm arbitrage.
All right. Any more questions? Ma'am, at the back there. Yeah. There's a mic coming to you.
Yeah, thank you. My question will be actually the same, but a little bit wider. 2 days ago, the European Parliament adopted three pillars for better security and solidarity in gas market. And at the same time, there is a Nord Stream 2, where some countries already say it's a threat for energy security and solidarity for them. Not only Ukraine, but European countries, European Union countries. The question is, I think to all panelists, where is this red line where the commercial-driven project should stop and energy security issues for country or union should start? Thank you.
Okay, let's take a few more questions so we can get the panelists to respond with one final roundup. Sir, yeah. And if you could be brief.
Yes, Bozirjek from Lazard. Question for Mr. Maroš Šefčovič. Maroš, post-Maidan, the EU really had a strong package for Ukraine. And December, 3 billion for EIB, completed. EIB, Suma talked about it this morning, a couple of MFA tranches. But there's a distinct feeling that we're at the end of a cycle. And in order to keep courageous reforms such as Andriy going, they need also to have some clarity in what key strategic partners such as the EU are ready to commit. How do you see in energy the strategic partnership between the EU and Ukraine in terms of projects and maybe other financial commitments?
Okay, one quickly here. Yeah, just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Anders Åslund, the Atlantic Council. My question is for Andriy Kobolyev. Could you elaborate the Stockholm arbitration case? How far have you gone to it? It's several parts of it. Have you final judgment on the award, and what can you tell us about it? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more here, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, sir. Right here.
Thomas Simon-Laritas from APCO. On Nord Stream 2, there needs to be a very honest conversation about who are the winners and who are the losers. The winners are German energy companies who get a monopoly of supply from Russia to sell gas to the rest of Europe. The winners are Ukraine and Southeast Europe.
You mean the losers?
The losers are Ukraine and Southeast Europe, and they are at very high risk of disruption and not receiving gas in the winter, because the infrastructure is not there to transit gas from Germany to Southeast Europe. It's very simple. So my question is, what does it take to the European Union to have a real open debate about whether your job is to protect German gas companies or the European Union and the security of supply of European citizens?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Maroš and Andriy to respond to this tranche of questions. Ian, you're going to just give some final thoughts, and Condi, you're going to close out the session. Maroš, since everyone is angry with the EU, why don't you start?
It's not true, it's not true. But I think that, of course, this just proves how this question is sensitive and how legitimate this problem is, and that it needs not only legal and commercial debate, but it needs real political considerations. This is what we are calling for already for some time. At the same time, I have to say that despite this project, I think that energy security-wise, we are in Europe much better off than we've been 2 years ago. We introduced the new system for vetting, checking the intergovernmental agreements. It means that now no country in Europe can be pushed into signing some kind of agreement with a major supplier which would be breaching the EU law or would be against the interest of that country. 2 days ago, we approved new rules which we call security of supply, which is again giving us the opportunity to screen even commercial contracts if the supplier has more than 28% of the share on the market. So it gives us additional legal instruments which we didn't have before. And we are also trying to remove that ambiguity, what kind of law applies for external pipelines bringing gas to Europe, and we are going to propose to amend our gas law that it would be very clear that European Union laws applies fully also to the external pipelines which are bringing the gas to the EU. So, I mean, this is the homework we do on top of all that infrastructural work I just described. If it comes to the strategic partnership with Ukraine, I mean, we very much support it. We very much push for it, and I think that we have very good cooperation with Ukraine. Where I see the possibilities, of course, gas transit is a very obvious one. I think this afternoon, we signed, I would say, the new chapter. The Ukraine and Europe are going to work together on lowering the energy bills for the citizens of Ukraine. We are going to put enormous amount of money for energy efficiency fund, which will lower the energy prices, increase the comfort for Ukrainians living in their apartments, and I believe can create even stronger energy security situation for Ukraine, because best energy you can have is the said one. And then, of course, we are working in different streams together with the United States and Canada. We do always modeling exercising before each winter. Is there enough gas in the gas storages? How can we use that better? So that relationship is very, very complex one, but I believe that we are only starting, because Ukraine is really becoming integral part of the European energy systems through energy community and through the close collaborations we have. And I believe that we will definitely find the solution to make sure that the gas transit to Ukraine will be preserved.
Andriy.
I will comment on the question about Stockholm. As you know, in June, we got this first separate award, which invalidated totally take-or-pay claims from Gazprom. Also, Tribunal has requested the parties to negotiate on decrease of gas price by applying total new formula. Those negotiations took us 3 months. They are over now. I can't comment on their specific outcomes, but I must say that I believe both sides are not actually satisfied. That is why today I am signing the submission to Tribunal explaining the progress, and we then will ask Tribunal to help the parties resolve outstanding issues. That is on supply case. On transit case, at least as far as we know, the schedule remains the same. We should get the decision on transit case in November. However, for Naftogaz, it's basically no downside situation. We can only win. We have nothing to lose there in terms of monetary things, but there are very important things which are critical for preserving transit. Those things are whether Gazprom will have to pay us for undelivered volumes, whether Gazprom will have to give us ability to have virtual reverse flow from European countries, something we discussed with Maroš for many times, something we need to optimize our pricing policy, and also there are elements which will tell us whether in the future Ukraine will be able to move gas delivery points from western border to the eastern border, so that European companies would be able to use our system, pay for this. And this Stockholm case is a very important element of overall puzzle for keeping transit in Ukraine. Thank you.
Ian, very quick last thoughts?
Sure, just a quick couple of things. One, we haven't talked about it, but I think the great news is peak demand is probably coming. We are probably now going to consume as a world less energy every year going forward. Renewables are here. They don't need subsidies. Electric vehicles are here. But the consequences of this is going to be, I think, a much more nationalistic energy policy, which will be followed by all governments. And one of the things that I think that means for Ukraine, and I know this is not what you want to hear, is I'm not quite sure you're asking the right question. Assume Nord Stream 2 is going to happen, because that's what I think you should do. I know you hate it for lots of very good reasons, but get your own energy policy sorted out. There is so much energy here, you don't need to worry about Nord Stream 2, but you've got to get it sorted out.
And Condi, finally.
Just a couple of final points. I come from a very free market country and a very free market background. And for me, first and foremost, energy is the lubricant for economic growth. And I think that's how we have to think about it. The problem is that we are in an asymmetric relationship with some countries that think about it not as a vehicle for economic growth, but as a vehicle for global and geostrategic domination. And that's asymmetric. And that's why Nord Stream 2 is a problem. If both parties just thought about it as an economic transaction, that would be one thing, but we know one party doesn't think of it that way. I always actually found it hard to have an energy discussion with the European Union because it wasn't organized for the European Union to have an energy discussion. I think progress is being made in that regard, and I think that's fantastic. I would just close with one thing. the North American energy platform is going to change the structural dynamics of energy for some time to come. And Ian, you mentioned two other factors that will, renewables will, and electric vehicles will change it in a major, major way. And so every country has got to get its energy policy straightened out, and you're fortunate in Ukraine that you have something to work with. I think you've been very, I think, extremely impressive in the way that you're going about trying to reform. But it's not just about what you can dig out of the ground. It's not just about what you can produce and transmit. It is about the very structure of your economy. Are contracts to be honored? Is corruption under control? Are there clear rules? Is it transparent? That's what will make North America such a powerful platform, and I think Ukraine can take a lesson from that.
On that note, thank you all very much.